Hello, I'm Adrian Ashton, and welcome to this video session about governance and charities. Now, as you may hopefully be aware, this is part of a wider series of induction and training briefs as we go through for you in your role as a new trustee or a trustee to be, or even as a trustee who's been around the block a few times and you're just simply thinking it might be good to have a quick refresher, make sure we're not missing anything. So in some of the previous sessions, we looked at some of the specific details about being a trustee. What are the roles and responsibilities, the checklist of what it means to be a trustee? What we're doing in this session is actually trying to make a bit more sense of that. How does that work in practice? How would you know that you are fulfilling those roles and responsibilities in terms of behaviors, in terms of knowledge, in terms of actions as well? So the idea of this session is to try and take you through what it means to be essential and also whether you should be hallmarked. And again, those words are very deliberate and we'll come to those in a moment. Specifically being essential because, as some of you may know who are watching this, the Charity Commission produced a document called the Essential Trustee. This is the kind of, rather than if you're kind of wading through a constitution, the roles and responsibilities, or the policies, all of the training stuff, this is the Charity Commission's attempt at a too long didn't read version of what you need to know. This is the emergency manual, if you will, the basics of how you need to start approaching being a trustee. And the idea of this session is just to guide you through what's in it. Okay, I'm not going to kind of read it out page for page because you've got access to a copy of it online and in shared document folders. But what I did want to do at this point, before we go any further, is just to point out, and you may be able to see this on the slide, the essential trustee. So we've got an image there of the cover sheet, and you'll see in the bottom corner of it is a date stamp, May 2018. Now, we're recording these videos in the autumn of 2020. Now, ordinarily, you kind of think, well, what's the point of putting a date on that? You know, information is information, right? It's all still equally valid and absolutely right. But what I wanted to stress on this is, depending on when you are viewing and enjoying, hopefully, this session of videos, just have a quick pause and a check that nothing's changed, because documents like this do get updated from time to time. The May 2018 version of the Essential Trustee is not the first one. There were one or two before that. So always just check that you're using the most current version of these documents as we go through. And the way you find out is you simply pop into your search engine, Charity Commission, and then Essential Trustee. And your first search results will pop up the most latest version. But before we get into this, there's a kind of a few awkward, embarrassing questions we need to ask first, really, before we start to think about how do you know you're being an essential, a good enough trustee. And there's an assumption that it's okay for you to be a trustee, and actually it may not be. And the Essential Trustee goes into this in a bit more detail, but generally speaking, there are a few kind of safety checks that we need to ask of you as a trustee to be, or if you're currently a trustee, to make sure none of these have cropped up since your appointment. And there are a few reasons that the Charity Commission gives that say, actually, in law, if these things happen to you, you cannot be a trustee in law. That's it. However much everybody wants you to, however much you may feel you're able to, the law says you can't. So you find a way to act as a volunteer or an observer or an invited guest, but not as a trustee. And those reasons, when we go through them, you kind of go, well, that kind of makes sense, really. A bit of common sense. But again, common sense, as we often keep picking up, is an incredibly rare superpower, it seems, in a lot of the world today. And those reasons in charity law are that you as a person have been barred in some way by the Charity Commission. So it could be that you've been a trustee of another charity, something's gone horrendously wrong there, the Charity Commission stepped in, they've done an investigation, an audit, and they've made a series of actions which names you, and you've been caught up in that. Okay, so you should know about that, and if you don't, or you're not sure, just check with the Charity Commission. You know, am I okay? And they'll say yes or no. It's a pretty straightforward thing. Reason number two, you may have been declared bankrupt. How is that relevant to being a trustee? Because I'm not being paid, I'm not looking after the finances of it per se. I'm not the finance managers. Well, why should it matter? Well, this is a principle of law. It's the same for companies. If you were a limited company and you were declared a bankrupt, you would not be able to act as a company director. Okay, that's just how it goes. And then there were a couple of other reasons as well. Now, again, the guidance here is a bit vague because these can be incredibly sensitive matters for all sorts of reasons, and they're to do with criminal convictions. And I don't really want to go into them here in this training session because I don't think it's appropriate to. If you are in that position where you have been charged and convicted of an offence, you would know that. Okay, and you should also know, depending on the nature of that offence, the implications that that has on your ability to take on certain roles. If you're not sure, just check around, ask around a bit discreetly. Again, the internet is a wonderful source of information and guidance if you know how to ask the right question. So that's the stuff in law. The essential trustee document hammers that point home. Before it even gets into it, that's almost one of the first pages. Are you actually okay to proceed? But then there may also be additional requirements of the charity itself. So the charity itself may say, well, in terms of our constitution or our rules, our articles, we have qualifying criteria for what it means to be a trustee. And that's specific to us as a charity. And those things can change over time. These other reasons, these four issues, they are the law. They aren't really going to change over time. This other stuff about what the charity thinks is important, that may change. So again, just check as you go through that everything's okay and up to date. So hopefully you're at the point of going, yes, you can proceed. Nothing there's a big red flag or a klaxon saying stop, do not proceed, do not go any further. So what does it mean to be essential? Being essential essentially means if you distill down, you look up a definition, essentially it's distilling down what are the core elements. If you take everything away, what is left at the bottom once you've distilled it all down, what's essential. And there's a list here, there's about 7 themes that the Charity Commission list. This is what we think it means to be essential. You're clear about what the charity's public benefit is, what it says it does on the tin. Everything's being followed in terms of the internal rules, the constitution, and wider laws and legislation. Conflicts of interest are being managed, that people are always acting in the charity's best interests. The resources of the charity, not just the money, but buildings, volunteers, intellectual property, tea bags in the kitchen, those are all resources that they're being used responsibly. Now, that's not to say that you're being very overly cautious with them, because that's also a risk. People are acting with care and skill, so trustees are being sensible. They're not being slapdash. Accountability, the charity can show how it is accountable. This is a key thing as well. And that risks and liability are being carefully managed. Now, that's quite a kind of a long, quite broad statements. You might be sitting there or listening thinking, how do we put that into practice? The roles and responsibilities videos were brilliant because that was a nice checklist. Well, the good news is don't panic, because the essential trustee actually puts this into a nice checklist format. And it groups all of these themes and all of these subjects around you must be doing this as a trustee, you must, and you should. You should be doing it this way, because this will help you make sure this is how you can start to approach it. This is a suggested starters for 10 for how you can make sure you're on top of this. Okay, so there's a very clear distinction as you go through. And again, these next sort of few prompts, the next few minutes of this session are just to start to dig into those a little bit more. Just so again, so when you start to read the document, because it's just a block of text, it makes a bit more sense. You're more comfortable and confident with how it fits together. So what the Essential Trustee Guide says is you must, by law, as a trustee, you must be able to show and explain how the charity does its public benefit. And we've touched upon this in some other videos about the importance of public benefit to charities. It's a basic requirement of law in terms of being able to prove it and evidence it. As trustees, you've also got to be able to show that you understand that as well, and it's doing it. And part of that as well is trustees must also be able to show they're following the rules as set out in the charity's governing document, its constitution, its rules, its articles, whatever they're called. So again, think about roles and responsibilities, that long checklist. Well, again, it's echoing across here. Now, the good news is the Commission says, okay, well, how do we know we're doing that? How can we make sure we're not missing anything? Well, the Commission says you should have regular reviews. It doesn't tell you how to do those reviews or how frequently you should do them, but it says it's a good idea every so often, maybe once a year or every 6 months, or every 3 months, every month, just have a brief pause, look back and go, how did we do over the last period? How did we think we do? Is everything on track? Is everything up to date in terms of public benefit in particular? And then if there are any issues, you can spot them sooner. You can deal with them. They're not going to be a problem. That idea of common sense again. The Essential Trustee Guide also says charity law says you have to avoid conflicts of interest. Trustees have to always act in the charity's best interests, not their own, not their family's interests, not any individual group of people in the community, but the charity's best interest, and that is about the public benefit, the benefit to everyone through the lens of its charitable objectives and purposes. And as trustees, you must also be clear about how you're managing those resources as well. So you're not there having to micromanage and sign off every item of expenditure or agree every single budget line, but you must have confidence to say, yes, that what the charity has, the stuff it has, its assets, they're being used well. We're not being overly cautious with them to the point where nothing happens, but we're not being reckless with them either. Now, in terms of how do we make sure we're doing that? Well, we should then. That's where policies and procedures come in. So a lot of people got policies. This is the dull, boring stuff, isn't it? We really should have these policies. Yeah, we've got to have one. The policies and the procedures are the way that you can make sure as trustees things are happening as they should in terms of how the charity's resources, its stuff, is being looked after properly. It's not being reckless. That public benefit, that conflicts of interest are being managed, because those policies and procedures will be the checklist to make sure, yep, we're on top of this. We can show it's happening. We're assured it's all good. The charity also says you must act with reasonable care and skill. And that's an interesting. It's actually quoted reasonable care and skill. We've touched upon this in some of the other previous sessions about how do you know you're qualified to be a trustee? How do you know you've got the right skills and expertise? What does the law expect of you? Well, that you act with reasonable care and skill. And again, there's guidance in the Essential Trustee document. What does that mean you should do in practice? Well, as a trustee, that means you should make sure you give enough time to it. You don't just turn up for a meeting unprepared. You're able to read advanced papers, talk with other trustees, think about this kind of stuff, and you're able to talk with other people, not just trustees or any volunteers or staff that the charity has, but you seek advice. Okay, you take other views. You take your time with it. That shows you're acting with reasonable care and using appropriate skill. Well, yeah, sounds pretty common sense. Some other musts as we go through. You must make sure statutory accounting and reporting requirements are met. That sounds quite scary and verbose and grandiose. Statutory accounting, that's your annual accounts. Okay, that's pretty much it. File your annual accounts with the Charity Commission and HMRC. That's kind of what it means by statutory accounting. If you're not sure you're up to date with those, then simply go to the Charity Commission website. Go to the Charity Commission website, look up your charity by the name or the number, and it will give you, in terms of the little tab down the side, filing history, and you'll be able to see, is our filing up to date? Have we filed our accounts as we were supposed to have done? Okay? And it will say, yes, you're up to date, or no, you're overdue. And if you're overdue, then you simply hold your hand up, ask some of your fellow trustees, oh, I think we might be behind on this. Are we okay? Is this in hand? And then job done. The other part of this, statutory reporting requirements. Well, again, this is nothing new. It's just the legalese phrase for it. Statutory reporting requirements is the trustee's annual report. What did you do in this last year? Did you do what you said you do on the tin? How have you delivered your charitable objectives? How has the public benefited? Yeah? This is what it means in practice. Now, going through that in terms of saying, well, okay, that's kind of a nice checklist stuff, but how do we go beyond that again? Because again, if you're watching this shows that your charity is interested in not just doing the basic bare minimum compliance. It wants to go beyond. It wants to be an exemplar of practice, of setting a standard. So the Charity Commission, through the Essential Trustee document, says your charity must show, as trustees, you can show how you are accountable to the people inside the charity and outside of the charity. Now, charities come in lots of different forms. A CIO says, well, there is a model of CIO that says there are no legal members. The trustees act as the members. There are other forms of charity where there are legal members as well as trustees. There's a voting system to elect the trustees from amongst the membership each year. There's a legal accountability there. But accountability isn't just about having a vote every year. Accountability can be about going to different groups of people with a consultation, asking for their views and opinion, sharing ideas and plans, and saying, give us a steer on this. Is this working well? In terms of the wider planning, you do that with the public, with partner organizations, and internally, when we're thinking about future activities, reviewing policies, procedures, setting budgets, that kind of accountability can work through conversations with staff, with volunteers. It can be quite informal, but it's documented and it shows that that accountability is rooted and it reflects the values of the charity, and it's building strong, supportive relationships throughout it. So nearly at the end now already, in terms of being an essential trustee, so it's actually a lot of common sense, nothing too scary or dubious, hopefully. But the Essential Trustee Guide also has two other sections within it that's important, I think, to flag up. One talks about risk and personal liability. Now, you may be saying, but as a trustee, we're not liable. We have an insurance policy, or because of how the charity has been registered, the liability of trustees is limited. We can't become personally liable. Well, that's true, but not always. That there may be occasions where that protection the law gives you as a trustee gets lifted, in the same way that it does for directors of limited companies. Directors can suddenly become personally liable if things have gone significantly off the rails. If you failed in your statutory duties, if you've been negligent, if you've been fraudulent. These are big, quite scary words. What they kind of show is you didn't use common sense. You thought something was going wrong and you didn't speak out. Something had gone wrong and you didn't go back to make sure it had been checked or fixed properly. That's the kind of plain English version of why that risk of liability may come up. But again, there's more detail in the Essential Trustee Guide that's important to have a dip through. The other thing that the guide talks about as well as the Essential Trustee is the roles of the chair and the treasurer. Now, you may recall, if you've watched some of the other videos in this session, that as a body of trustees, you all stand together. You are equally responsible for the charity. But the Charity Commission and Charity Law does make this distinction about the chair of a charity and the treasurer of a charity, because they are taking leadership roles. They're kind of on point for certain issues for you as a body of trustees. The Essential Trustee says, if you're in that chair, if you've got that kind of name badge, I'm the chair, this is the additional stuff that it's useful for you to know in terms of how you can then make sure that all the trustees are being supported and encouraged and are able to get on and do the job properly, because people will be looking to you as the chair to do that. So it's a bit of additional support for you, similarly as the treasurer in terms of finance and budgets and accounts. Okay, so that's what's in the guide. As I've said, hopefully lots of kind of stuff which you initially seems a bit scary, but as we've gone through it, you kind of go, okay, that's kind of common sense. That seems reasonable, nothing to add there. But if there is anything that you're worried about, you're concerned about, then do speak to your fellow trustees. Do speak to the chair. Have a chat with other people. Don't sit on it and suffer away in silence. If anything's come out of here and it's made you a bit confused about, well, how do we do that in practice? I'm not quite sure. Just ask. You should never be in trouble for asking a question. No such thing as a stupid question, okay? Now, the other part of this session, that you may recall at the start, we talked about being essential and being hallmarked. So again, the idea of hallmark is a bit like jewelry. You have a ring that's hallmarked as a sign of quality. So again, in the past, at the time the Essential Trustee Guide was being created, the Charity Commission also produced a sister document, a parallel guide called The Hallmarks of an Effective Charity. How would you tell that the charity is working well? What are the signs and wonders? What can it show? What can it exhibit? Now, some of you may be watching this and think, oh, yes, I remember that, because you've been a trustee a while, or you've been chatting with someone who has been a trustee a while and they've made reference to it. Well, we're not going to talk about the hallmarks of an effective charity in this video, or any video in this series, in fact, because it doesn't exist anymore. Several years ago, the charity sector as a whole, all of the sort of leading bodies, the membership bodies, the representative bodies, the advocacy bodies, the research bodies, who are at the apex of all the charities throughout England and Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, came together and said, hallmarks of an effective charity, that's nice, but actually, surely we should be leading on this. And so they collaborated together and they came up with something called the Code, the Charity Governance Code. And you know what? It was so good that the Charity Commission saw it and said, you know what? We don't need the hallmarks document anymore. This is better. So rather than try and go in competition with the sector itself, the Commission said, okay, we will withdraw the hallmarks of the effective charity, and we will now encourage people to make reference and use of the Charity Governance Code. Now, don't panic. You've been sticking it out very patiently and well through this session already. We're not going to go into the Charity Governance Code here and now. That's going to be the next session that we've got in this part of the series. Cracking the code, the Charity Sector Governance Code, how it came about, what it looks like in practice, and actually the fact that there's more than one of them. So how do you make sure you've got the right version? So that's all to come up. This has been what it's meant to be, an essential trustee. Hopefully you found elements of it encouraging and reassuring. There's been parts of it that you thought, okay, didn't quite realize that. Now I do feel much more confident and knowledgeable. But ultimately, hopefully it has added to your ability in terms of going out there and being a fantastic trustee in the charity. Thanks for listening.